Working with CAD models is usually a process that involves making changes to features and geometry over time. This means you'll need to go back and make changes at different points in the design history. The main ways you can make modifications is by editing sketch dimensions and constraints used to generate 3D features, by editing the features themselves to incorporate different sketch profiles, end conditions, and numerical entries, and by reordering features in the Design Manager and using the rollback functionality to add new features at certain points in the design. In this lesson, I'll walk you through some edits I want to make to this plastic bin box. First, I'll make some changes to sketch dimensions, then adjust some sketch constraints, followed by reordering features and rolling back to add new features, and then making modifications to existing features in the design. Here I have a plastic bin box, which is made of a series of sketch-based features. In this video, I want to show you how you can edit sketch dimensions and constraints to modify the design. I want to make some changes to the overall size of the bin box, as well as some edits to the ridge along the top edge. This means I need to make edits to the sketches those features are based on. To begin, I'll edit the very first sketch, which creates the overall shape of the box. I can simply double-click on the sketch to edit it, press the N key to switch to a normal view, and begin editing. The first dimension I'll adjust is the overall height here on the right. I'll double-click on it, then type in a new value of 115 millimeters, and press Enter. All these black dimensions are driving dimensions, meaning that the sketch geometry is determined by that dimension and will change if the value is updated. You may also notice that this sketch has a gray dimension showing at the top. Gray dimensions like this one are driven dimensions, meaning that the value is a result of all the other driving dimensions establishing the overall geometry. In this case, the overall length of the box is determined by this 175 millimeter dimension at the bottom, the 45-degree angle on the bottom left, and the 30 millimeter height. Let's say, though, that I want to use the 200 millimeter dimension currently shown in gray to drive the overall length of the box. To do this, I need to change one of the other driving dimensions to driven. I'll change this 30 millimeter dimension by clicking on the leaders, then selecting the Driven Driving Dimension option from the context toolbar. This changes it to gray. Now I can switch the 200 millimeter dimension to driving by selecting the leaders once again and then selecting the same icon from the context toolbar. This means I can change the value of this dimension, which I'll change to 215 millimeters, and the entire length of the box updates. Notice as well that the 30 millimeter dimension is automatically updating as a driven dimension, which now has a value of 45 millimeters. This completes the edits to this first feature, so I'll click OK, and the entire model updates. The other feature to which I want to make edits is the ridge on the top of the left and right sides. This means I need to edit the sketch that created this feature. I'll double-click on Sketch 4, press the N key to switch to a normal view, and I can start making edits. The two modifications I want to make are making this angled edge be parallel to the bottom of the box and making the end of the ridge on the right be in line with the notch at the bottom. To start with the angled edge, it's currently using a perpendicular constraint, which you can see appear when I click on the line itself. To remove this sketch constraint, I can click on the icon and then either press Delete on the keyboard to remove it, or I can click on the Edit Constraint icon in the context toolbar. In this case, I'll edit the constraint, and I can choose which references define the constraint. I'll click on the X to remove the line in reference 2, and I'll click on the vertical line on the right side of the part to force the line in the sketch to remain perpendicular to the vertical edge. This keeps this line parallel to the bottom of the box, but is defined by the vertical edge on the right. Now when I click OK, the line has the sketch constraint applied. The other constraint I want to change is the coincident constraint that keeps this vertical line in the sketch attached to the right edge of the box. I want this line to instead be collinear with the notch at the bottom. To do this, I'll click on the point at the bottom right corner, and the coincident constraint appears. This time I want to delete it, since the relation I want to add back in is a different type. I'll click on it and then press delete. Now I can drag the line over to reposition it. To add the collinear constraint, I'll select the edge in the sketch. Then hold Ctrl or Command for Mac users and select the vertical edge on the notch. Now I can choose the collinear constraint shown here in the context toolbar, and the sketch line snaps into place. This completes all the edits to constraints in this sketch, so I'll click OK. And the ridge is updated simply by making a couple small adjustments to the constraints in the base sketch. The plastic bin box shown here has a few features that I want to change to clean up the design. In this case, I want the inner sidewalls of the box to be smooth without these small cutouts. I also don't want the tabs at the top to be hollowed out. In addition, I want to add a small amount of draft to the side supports, along with adding small chamfers on these inner corners. These changes can be incorporated by reordering some features in the Design Manager, as well as rolling back to a certain point in the design history and incorporating new features. To get started, I want the inside of the plastic bin box to have smooth walls that don't follow the contour of the exterior faces. This means that the shell feature shouldn't be placed at the very end of the feature order. xDesign allows you to move features around in the Design Manager as long as you're not trying to move it above a feature it's depending on. All I have to do is click and drag the shell feature where I want it, which I'll place between Extrude 1 and Sketch 4. And now the shell feature is only removing the inner geometry from the original extrude feature. This allows all the other downstream features to retain their geometry without the shell command cutting into them. Because of this, the inner walls of the plastic bin box are smooth, and the ridge around the top isn't hollowed out. The next changes I want to make to this design involve modifying the H support on the side. I want to add draft to the side walls of the supports and add chamfers to the inner corners. I could go ahead and start adding them directly, but because this H support is mirrored to the other side of the box, I want these features to be incorporated before the mirror feature. To do this, I can drag this dot in the Design Manager back to the last feature I want included, which in this case is the Extrude 4 feature. If I rotate the part, you can see the support is only on one side of the model. Now I'll add the draft feature by clicking the command here in the action bar, then clicking on the front face as the neutral plane, selecting all the side faces of the supports, leaving the angle set to 5 degrees, and clicking OK. You may have also noticed that the draft feature was added in the Design Manager directly below the Extrude 4 feature just above it. This is because I added the feature once I rolled back to the extrude. Next, I want to add chamfers to these inner corners of the H support. I'll enable the command from the action bar, click on all 4 inner edges, make sure the distance is set to 5 mm at a 45-degree angle, and click OK. Now, all the modifications are included in the H support on this side of the plastic bin box. So if I roll back down to the end of the Design Manager, the H support is patterned back to the other side of the box and includes the features I added to the original. Reordering features and rolling back in the design aren't the only ways to make modifications. You can edit feature properties directly. The next modification I want to make involves thickening the sidewalls of the box, which means editing the existing shell feature. To edit the command, I can either double-click on it, or I can click on the 3 dots and then select Edit from the icons that appear. In the dialog box, I'll increase the thickness from 1 mm to 3 mm, click OK, and the model updates automatically. Now I want to extend the ridge all the way down to the angled corner on the front, and I want to extend farther out away from the exterior sidewalls of the box. This means I'll need to edit the extrude feature. I'll double-click on it, and I can see that there's another enclosed profile in the sketch I can use. I'll make sure the Select Profiles box is enabled and click on the other sketch profile to add it. I also want to extend the ridge outward by 7.5 millimeters, so I'll change the depth here and click OK, and the model updates with the new ridge. The last modification I want to make is to add some additional chamfers to the corners on the inner bottom face of the box. I could create a new feature and start selecting edges, but I know I want them to be the same size as one of the chamfers I created earlier. This means I can edit the feature and simply add more edges to the selection. I'll edit chamfer 3 and select all the edges and click OK. Now these edges are chamfered as well, simply by editing a feature and clicking on a few additional edges. This completes all the modifications I wanted to make to the plastic bin box.